Good morning, everyone. I'm Cameron Barr, Managing Editor for News and Features here at the Post. Thank you to those of you joining us here in the Washington Post Live Center and to those watching on our digital platforms. Today, we are pleased to partner with Reporters Without Borders, the world's largest non-governmental organization specializing in the defense of media freedom. This conversation comes at a complex time for journalism. Governments and non-state groups are restricting the ability of reporters to do their jobs, in some cases through the use of intimidation and violence. Fake news is proliferating, making it harder for readers to discern what is truth and what is fiction. And just about anyone with access to the internet can practice journalism or claim to. At the same time, we and other news organizations are witnessing a surge in demand for our work. Our audience is growing, as is the number of people willing to subscribe. And every day we hear from readers encouraging us to keep reporting, keep telling stories, keep finding the truth. In just a moment, Delphine Algon, North America Director for Reporters Without Borders, will present the 2017 World Press Freedom Index. As director for the US office, she oversees all American-based activities for the organization and advocates for journalists and media rights worldwide. Following her presentation, the Washington Post's Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, Dana Priest, will lead what promises to be a fascinating discussion. She'll be joined by Zaina Erhaim, a valiant and much celebrated journalist who is working with the Institute for War and Peace Reporting in Syria, Ben Maku, a national security reporter for Vice Canada, who is fighting Canadian federal authorities in court to protect source materials relating to interviews with an alleged Canadian Islamic State militant. Tom Malinowski, who served as US Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor in the Obama administration, and who was the longtime Washington Director of Human Rights Watch. And Erol Önderoglu, who has been a Reporters Without Borders representative in Turkey for more than 20 years. He is currently on trial in Turkey for supporting and collaborating with a pro-Kurdish daily. Finally, I'd like to say that Delphine and Reporters Without Borders were tremendous partners in our efforts to secure the release of Washington Post correspondent Jason Rezaian, who, as some of you may remember, was held in Evin prison in Tehran for 544 days. Our gratitude for this help is boundless. And now, please welcome Delphine to the stage.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Cameron. And actually, I would like to thank you, the whole team at the Washington Post, for this partnership and for all their work to make this launch a success. Welcome to the 2017 World Press Freedom Index. My name is Delphine Algon, and I'm the North America Director for Reporters Without Borders. I really would like to thank you all for being here on behalf of all my colleagues at Reporters Without Borders, Reporters Sans Frontières. All my colleagues who advocate since 1985 for press freedom rights worldwide. I would like to thank you on behalf of all Reporters Without Borders 130 correspondents who report every day in their own countries on press freedom violation. But most importantly, I would like to thank you on behalf of all the journalists that we defend and assist every day all around the world. And today, here at the Washington Post, I'm thinking especially of one journalist, one American journalist. His name is Austin Tice. He is actually the last American journalist still detained abroad in Syria. He was freelancing for many US American media, including the Washington Post, when he was taken captive near Damascus in August 2012. According to diverse high-level sources, Austin is alive. So thank you for not forgetting him and for working with us to do everything possible to bring him safely home. So now, the World Press Freedom Index. Reporters Without Borders has published this index since 2002. And the index measures the level of freedom of information in 180 countries. The index reflects the degree of freedom that journalists, news organizations, and netizens enjoy in each country. This year's index reflects a world in which attacks on the media have become commonplace, and strongmen are on the rise. This year's index highlights the danger of a tipping point in the state of media freedom, especially in leading democracies. Donald Trump's rise to power in the United States and the Brexit campaign in the UK were marked by high-profile media bashing, a highly toxic anti-media discourse that drove the world into a new era of new words, post-truth, disinformation, and fake news. In the 2017 index, the United States are down 2 places, at the 43rd position. The UK are down 2 places, at the 40th position. The rate at which democracies are approaching the tipping point is alarming. If media freedom is not secure, then none of the other freedoms can be guaranteed. Media freedom has retreated wherever authoritarian regime has triumphed. I'm thinking of Poland, Hungary, Turkey, Russia, and so on. Media freedom has never been so threatened. This past year, nearly two-thirds of the countries measured have registered a deterioration. Even the top-ranked countries, like after actually 6 years at the top, Finland has surrendered its #1 position due to political pressure and conflict of interests. Actually, the worst fall this year are for Nicaragua. Nicaragua distinguished itself in 2017 by falling further than any other country on the index. Tanzania is down 12 places. President John Bulldozer Magufuli keeps tightening his grip on the media. Amid all the decline, rise in 2 countries could seem particularly promising and will hopefully continue. Gambia and Colombia. Colombia, where no journalists were killed in 2016, making it the first time in 7 years. As I mentioned earlier, the 2017 index shows that violations of the freedom to inform are less and less the prerogative of authoritarian regime. Media freedom is proving to be increasingly fragile in democracies as well. Countries regarded as models for democracy are no exception. Canada has fallen 4 places, the US 2, Poland 7, New Zealand 8. Media freedom erosion is particularly visible in the European democracies. The decline in respect for media freedom in democracy is not new. It's not new. It was already noticeable in the previous year. But what is striking this year is the scale and the nature of the violation seen. The US presidential campaign set off a witch hunt against journalists. Donald Trump's repeated diatribes against the media, accounting journalists of being among the most dishonest human beings on earth, and of deliberately spreading fake news, compromising, of course, a long US tradition of defending freedom of expression. This hate speech contributed to disinhibit attacks on the media almost everywhere in the world, including in democratic countries. It is now France's turn to choose a new president and to see certain politicians assailing the lying media. The French, too, are falling into the trap of alternative facts and post-truth, and succumbing to a poisonous and violent environment in which it has become normal to hiss at journalists at meetings or even throw them up. Donald Trump doesn't have a monopoly of media bashing. There are many other examples in the UK, in Italy, in Tanzania. The past year has seen no shortage of leaders of democratic countries who have intervened directly in an attempt to modify media reporting. Even in Finland, an enraged prime minister meddled in public broadcaster programming, for example. Cases of direct political pressure to obstruct journalists were reported in Uruguay, in Chile, and so on. Poland has fallen another 7 places in this year's index, after a spectacular 29-place plunge the year before. The controversial reform carried out by Poland's ultra-conservative government include bringing public radio and public TV broadcasters under its control and turning them into propaganda outlets. Spying on sources is becoming always more common. In Germany, the parliament passed a law last October extending the mass surveillance powers of the intelligence agency. The German intelligence can now legally spy on all non-German and non-EU nationals, including journalists and lawyers. It turns out that this controversial law actually was just helping to legalize existing practices. It was also in late 2016 that the United Kingdom adopted a new law extending the surveillance powers of the British intelligence. Even more alarming, in early 2017, the Law Commission put forward a proposal for a new espionage act that would allow the courts to imprison journalists and others for up to 14 years for obtaining leaked information. 14 years for obtaining leaked information. Luxembourg is setting a bad example as well. And I can continue with the UK or New Zealand, which are also working to criminalize whistleblowers and journalist sources. And now maybe let's talk about Canada, because there are actually a lot to say about Canada. One of the reasons why Canada fell 10 places in last year's index was mostly the adoption of an anti-terrorist act in 2015 that encroached on freedom of expression. It has fallen 4 more places in this year's index after a series of scandals in 2016 highlighted the fragility of the confidentiality of sources. It emerged in November that at least 6 journalists had been spied on by the Quebec Provincial Police, which just week before had seized a journalist's computer in a raid on his newspaper. The Montreal City Police, meanwhile, obtained at least 24 warrants to spy on journalist Patrick Lagacé's mobile phone. In all these cases, the aim was to identify sources. This principle was also badly undermined by a legal dispute between the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and our panelist, Ben Makuch, a journalist for Vice News. He will go further on his own case. In a reckless and alarming manner, Canada's sovereign neighbor, the US, has continued to implement measures that endanger the right to information, especially investigative journalism, which depends on the safety and anonymity of its source. The Obama administration obsession with controlling information and combating whistleblowers was reflected last year in whistleblower Jeffrey Sterling continued detention and in border search of US and foreign journalists. In France, ownership of the leading media outlets has never been so concentrated, and the risk of conflict of interest never so great. But wait, where the situation was already really concerning, it's getting worse and worse. The World Press Freedom Map is getting darker and darker. A total of 21 countries are now colored black on the 2017 World Press Freedom Map, because the situation there is classified as very bad. Burundi is now part of the 21 countries in the black zone. The other 2 countries that have entered the index black zone are both from the region with the worst score, the Middle East. Many journalists have been imprisoned in both countries, 24 in Egypt and 14 in Bahrain, at least. And they both detain their journalists for very long periods of time. At the bottom of the black zone, 3 countries have monopolized the last 3 places for the past 12 years. North Korea, Turkmenistan, and Eritrea have consistently suppressed and crushed all divergence from the state propaganda. I actually may want to highlight a few countries where the situation is dramatic. Iran, of course, Syria. 6 years after the start of the bloody civil war in Syria, Syria is still the world's deadliest country for journalists. Nothing has been done to protect journalists from the insane barbarity of its dictator and armed groups. Journalists are also caught in the ceasefire in Yemen. Chaos is equally dangerous for journalists in Libya. And Turkey. Turkey is definitely one of the most alarming cases of the index. Ranked 155th after falling more places in the past year. Actually, the coup d'etat, or the coup attempt in July 2016, swept aside the last restraint on the government in its war against critical media. The ensuing state of emergency has allowed the authority to disband dozens of media. Dozens of media have been closed. And more than 100 journalists have been detained without trial. Erol will also, of course, speak more about the situation in Turkey. I can go on and go on telling you about the situation in Mexico, where at least 10 journalists have been killed last year, and we saw a new spate of killing this year in March, especially. I can tell you about the situation in Afghanistan. But after this alarming overview, I would like to remind you, maybe, or try to remind you why press freedom is so important. And I will try to do that with a little humoristic spin. Thank you. And now I'm just as eager as you to hear from such prominent panelists and to hear the real stories behind the boring numbers. Please welcome with me Dana Priest, Dana Eraim, Erol Onderoglu, Ben Makush, and Tom Malinowski. Thank you very much.
Hello. Oh, I recognize many of you out here. So I'm Dana Priest at the Washington Post. I also teach journalism now at the University of Maryland. And Delphine has left us with a lot of problems to solve. That's how I'd like to think of it. And some of the panelists up here have actually found very creative ways to get around the obstacles that they face. And they've also faced many. We have Ben, who's already been imprisoned, and other problems up here. So I wanted to start first by saying that we'd love to take questions from the audience or from those of you who are watching. And our hashtag, if you'd like to tweet at us, your question is RSF Index. So, and with that, we'll start by talking a little bit more to Zena, who's from Syria, and really did come up with a really clever solution to a very horrible problem of war. And so if you could start by telling us a little bit more about how you see Syria in general for journalists, and then what you did in your Citizen Journalist Project. And then we're gonna watch a video that she made with some of her Syrian colleagues.
Sadly, there is no one Syria that I can speak about. Now there are many Syrias. The Kurdish Syria, the ISIS-controlled Syria, the regime-controlled Syria, and the rebel-led ones. And journalists in each part of these is facing so much troubles that are different from the others. I think the only common thing is the death threats and the suppression. And there is another layer of this suppression is only applied on women in all these areas, even the Kurdish ones that are being reported as one of the most gender equality areas. So sadly, journalists and citizen journalists, those who are until now our main source of information, because sadly we don't have so many international journalists at Justin who are risking their lives to go and report. So those main source of information are being suppressed by the local forces whenever they're trying to challenge the reality that they provide. So the choice is you either be a propagandalist or you're going to be facing different kind of death. Slaughter, deported in ISIS, in the Kurdish area, they are deporting journalists. In the regime area, you will be killed under torture in one of the prisons. In rebel-held area, you get kidnapped and no one will get where you are. Well, the good thing is that in rebel-held areas, as I was threatened, they wouldn't kidnap a woman, usually. So the faith is being killed. So it's a comforting thing. Don't worry, you're not gonna be kidnapped. They will just assassinate you if you do or say anything that doesn't fit in their propaganda. So this is a general theme. But despite that, and despite the very conservative society in the north where women citizen journalists are still they are still reporting. We are still having more than 100 citizen journalists who live inside Syria, and they're still trying to get the story out with fake names, with alternative ways. Some women who are not allowed to mix with men, they would write the questions on a piece of paper, hand it to their husbands to get the answers. They are finding their way out for us to be informed, to get the truth from Syria, which is very difficult, and sadly, it's very low on the index.
Can you set up the video that we're about to see? What is it that we're going to watch? If you know.
Last year, I worked on a series of films where I documented the extra difficulties that women are facing inside Syria. Sadly, the journalist woman, her family is still living in regime-held area, so I couldn't show her face or her film. It's very much hidden because she's afraid of her family. But what I tried to do is to document what's going on in this woman's life on camera. So in the future, they can't be forgotten, because I learned from my Syrian history how women's stories are usually put aside and not reported. So I tried to capture that on camera, not to allow this to happen.
Okay, let's see the video.
أهم شغلة فيني أعرف فيها عن حالي إنه أنا بنت من بنات الثورة. لي 4 سنين نادرة حالي للثورة ولساتني مستمرة إن شاء الله. أيام الحرب يعني في كتير صعوبات. يعني نحن إلنا تقريبا أكثر من شهر وقفنا أسبوعين لأنه نزل برميل كتير قريب من هون، فالطلاب ما عاد حدا يجي، كلهم خافوا. يعني الوضع الأمني هو أكبر مشكلة، إنه مو أي أم بتأمن على أولادها وتبعتهم على المدرسة.
أشتغل بالإغاثة، تأمين مواد غير غذائية وأحياناً غذائية لمدينة حلب وللريف. يعني هن بيلاقوها غريبة اللي حوالي، إنه بحس من نظراتهم إنه بنت إيش عم تعمل بيناتهم، بس يعني أنا بالنسبة لي عادي.
بعتقد إنه أنا صرت أكثر إنه أهتم في الناس أكثر، خصوصاً النساء والبنات. كنت ما أهتم إيش بدي منهم، إيش من صار معهم، إيش بدي منهم، بس في وقت الحرب حسيت إنه نحن في حاجة لبعضنا أكثر.
Okay, and how widely was this viewed?
Not pretty much. if I did it on a fighter leader, you would find it everywhere. But sadly, because it's speaking about the lives of the women. And the last woman that you saw, Ghalia, she is still in Idlib. She's running 5 women's center. And she was, there were 2 assassinations attempts for her. And her center was burned twice. And she's very much underreported.
Thank you. So we'll come back to all these countries again, but let's skip to Turkey for a moment. Errol, can you tell us quickly your story? And he's facing charges when he goes back that have been pending for a while. So we hope that you can be here next year too with us. If you would just give us a little synopsis about what you've been through.
Thank you, Dana. It was just before the state of emergency, the coup attempt process, where I decided to stand next to a pro-Kurdish daily. They launched a campaign on 3rd of May, World Press Freedom Day, and invite many intellectuals, journalists to stand as a symbolic manner at the editorial desk. It was enough for Turkish judiciary to indict me. Of course, it was, they tried to make a first example for jailing in the scope of this campaign, and to stop this campaign by jailing 3 of journalists. So I found myself late afternoon when I went by myself to the prosecutor office at the city center of Istanbul in a prison. So I was kept 10 days waiting for my indictment. And I should say that it was the time where international and national civil society organization pressure was important and taken into account at the same time. So thanks to this wonderful solidarity movement, I was released pending trial 10 days later on.
And Tom, you probably know this moment. I mean, how has the State Department under the previous administration, where has it been successful in Turkey? Part of what I'd really like to talk about is, what can we come up with that we haven't thought of before? So if we can learn a little bit from you about the past and what actually worked to pressure Turkey, I think that would be instructive.
Turkey has been a particularly tough case just because there's so much going on, including the situation inside Turkey, the crackdown after the coup, the violence in the Kurdish areas, but also the war in Syria, and which has placed Turkey in a very critical position in terms of everything that we are trying to do as a country in Syria. I can't think of a place where the considerations in US policy are more complicated right now, and that was certainly the case under the Obama administration. I still think even under those very complicated circumstances, the fact that the United States and other countries are willing to speak out even occasionally about cases of journalists being imprisoned or newspapers shut down makes a difference. There was never a point in which the government of Turkey would have come to us and said, oh, you publicly condemned us for arresting that journalist, and we thought about it, and oh, you're right. We did the wrong thing. We're sorry. We'll let him go. That never happens. There's always, denial and defiance, and this is none of your business, and he's a terrorist. Are you?
We all are, in a way.
Okay. All right. Sorry. But then, strangely, some time later, you'll see something slightly better happen. And I think what it comes down to is that everybody cares about their reputation. Dictators are more insecure about their reputation than Democrats are, because a democratically elected leader of a democratic country has no reason to be insecure. I won an election, and it was fair, and the Constitution provides for the authority that I have. Whereas if you have gotten there through less than pure means, you know that everybody, they may not be saying it to your face, but they're saying it when your back is turned, and so your sensitivity to criticism is sometimes even greater. than
Well, I wanted to ask both of you about, we do have a president that's already taken quite a different tact. To be, I guess to describe it would be, he doesn't like to do the naming and shaming. And we saw this in the Egypt case. He did this very quietly. So if you were, both of you, if you could guide the Trump administration, knowing what they are, not what you want them to be, how would you use what he's shown us to be his foreign policy so far? How would you use that to pressure Turkey to do something?
Well, I want to get your views on Turkey, but the idea that Donald Trump disapproves of naming and shaming, I think, is pretty silly. He names and shames Canada. He names and shames Germany. He names and shames all of our friends who share our values in the world. He just doesn't seem to be all that comfortable naming and shaming.
Okay, but you're kind of escaping my question. I think it's a good point that you've made, but I really want to use what we have and what, it is not the Obama administration anymore, and to come up with, how do you use the person that's in front of you, and what would you suggest?
Right, well, what I'm suggesting is the person who's in front of us is not a fully formed phenomenon. And so, if we believe that public pressure in a case like Turkey or China or Vietnam or Ethiopia is important, I'm certainly not going to give up on asking this administration to employ it, because they're certainly capable of publicly pressuring those who they have strong feelings about. The question that remains is whether they're really going to care about these issues. And for the first 60, 70 days or so, President Trump went out of his way to tell us that he did not. Right. And then some unexpected things happened in terms of the Syria strike, the reaction, it said, to pictures that he saw of human suffering, a moment of empathy, perhaps, the raising the case of the American in Egypt. One suggestion that I think a number of us have made is, all right, if you're going to be America first, and this related to the Egypt situation, at least stand up for American citizens who are being imprisoned in these countries, American journalists who are persecuted. At least stand up for people who are jailed because they're taking money from American foundations and American NGOs. At least stand up to anti-American propaganda by dictators like General Sisi in Egypt or Erdogan in Turkey. Start there, and then maybe we can expand out to everybody else.
Okay. Errol, how do you see it? New administration, very different approach.
I think that even it's not too easy to compare Trump administration and Ankara administration, Erdogan administration. Naming and shaming, it's quite a common point when they are dealing with not nice issues. I think that, Turkish people believe that Obama administration used to be silent toward domestic issues in Turkey and in general in the region. But I think that if there is a positive step to be achieved is for Trump administration to, even it's not so open, even it's not so publicly exposed, to rebuild new relationship with Ankara, with Turkey, by contributing for a constructive atmosphere within the country, because Turkish political and social life is extremely polarized, fragmented. And today what is crucial for Turkish people is to be involved in a reconciliation atmosphere. So it is important not only for Turkish people, but it is also important for Turkey to rebuild a strong nations, not by consolidating powers, but by consolidating dialogue within the countries. So I believe that safeguard of media freedom, respect of fundamental rights are not some standard exposed to circumstances or conditions. I think that this leverage in the dialogue between US and Turkey would be very contributing. Of course, Erdogan is not open. He would never admit that it will be thanks to Trump administration or to EU, but it would take to account when elaborating a new process. Of course, Erdogan over the last months has multiplied diplomatic crisis with European Union. And I think that it's another role that maybe Trump administration can take. And we need, of course, it can appear very, how to say, it can appear a contradiction comparing what the impact of Trump administration impact in media freedom here. But let's say we should be used to live under contradiction as well.
Thank you. Let's turn to Ben for a minute. Canada? You know, that was my first reaction. Delphine, what are you doing putting in a Canadian here?
Yeah.
So what is tell us about your case.
Sure, yeah, that's what I keep getting all morning. Canada? Why is Canada there? And trust me, this is a reaction I've had myself personally for 2 years now. I was actually reporting in Russia at the time, and our offices were served with a production order for me to give up all of the information I had on this.
From the Canadians, not the Russians.
No, not the Russians. But I just reported on Boris Nemtsov's assassination, and I thought to myself, well, this is a very different country from the country I came from. That opposition is being gunned down, and then I come back to Canada, and not to compare the two, but it was a bizarre feeling to know that my government was coming after me to give up information on a source, and I'm a journalist. I thought this was, it is actually enshrined in our Constitution, and not only that, but I was given a top secret gag order where I couldn't even talk about it for 9 months, which, was probably the most troubling 9 months to go through, because you're under extreme amounts of secrecy, and if you talk about something to do with your life, you could go to jail.
Did your editors know?
My editors
Okay.
knew, but I couldn't talk about it with my family, I couldn't talk about it with my friends. And most of all, there was a federal election going on in which they were discussing anti-terror laws, the same anti-terror law that made Canada go down 10 points on the index, and talking about the niqab and things like that had to do with civil liberties, and I was sitting here, under a gag order. So I've gone to court to fight this, to give up the information I have on this individual as an alleged ISIS fighter from Calgary. I've lost twice, sorry. And now I'm attempting to go to the Supreme Court to take this higher and challenge this issue. Because there aren't, the irony is that, there's a well-documented antagonistic relationship, I think, right now between the Trump administration and the press. But the irony is, in Justin Trudeau's Canada, by all appearances a very liberal place, there are absolutely no shield laws for Canadian journalists. We have no protections. So on top of that, recently came to light that 6 journalists were being spied on. And this is confirmed. And by the way, I've tried to see if the Canadian government agencies, the intelligence agencies, were spying on me. I've asked, and they neither confirm nor deny. So yeah, it's a very interesting situation right now in Canada.
Are they spying on them and perhaps you because they want to find your sources, or are they going on a fishing exhibition to come up with something, or can you tell?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's a fishing expedition. It certainly was the case with me. I think that they're trying to see what they can get from me, or see what information they could gather. But also, I think that they're pressing their new powers, or they're pressing for new powers in a brand new information age where, I was communicating with multiple alleged terrorists via text message. I think that they wanted to push the powers of getting that information. Also, you know, I'm quite confident my reporting has been spied on because of the sensitivity of it, because of sort of the boogeyman terrorist aspect, and the things that governments will do under the banner of national security.
And what's been the reaction from the public to this, towards you or your publication?
In Canada, it's been quite positive. Of course, I've gotten some far-right trolls telling me that I'm safeguarding a terrorist, which is not the case. I would treat any source, I'm sure a lot of people in this room as well, who are journalists, I would treat a terrorist the same way as I would treat a politician or any regular citizen that I speak to. There's no difference. And in fact, when you start impeding on that relationship, you turn journalists into an arm of an intelligence agency or a law enforcement agency. And you know the very funny but darkly comic ad that RSF just did at the end with all the wonderful dictators and their puppies. I think that that's very true. I mean, this is something that could happen if, in a liberal democracy, if we are not vigilant about what we do with press freedoms.
And has the chill been, do you think you're being made an example of so that other journalists don't follow, you know, your path? And do you think that's happening, that people are intimidated by it?
I think people in Canada are certainly intimidated by it. I've had a few journalists say to me, if I do stuff like you were doing, do you think what happened to me is going to, or happened to you, happen to me? And, you know, I can say it certainly has not stopped me. I've continued to talk to multiple jihadists even after I was served, and I published stories about it. I've spoken to multiple individuals since that I'm sure the government would love for me to give them, but you know, I think that it's important that we don't give in to these types of tactics. But to answer your question, yeah, there's certainly a chilling effect in Canada, and I think that that's a possibly very destructive thing.
Yeah. So I'm going to start a new line of questioning, but can you think of questions yourselves? And we have people with microphones around if you'd like to ask them, and if you just find those microphones. In the meantime, let me just one more on this. You brought up surveillance, and that's both an issue probably for everybody, but also there have been some advances in what I would call our protection against surveillance. So I wanted to first ask you about, have you learned how to take new precautions against surveillance, and how good do you think the Syrian government, how much do they work to try to surveil journalists?
Okay, just a quick comment about Ben. I think being disappointed with your government is really luxury. My government wants me killed.
Yes.
And going to my embassy is a suicidal mission. So I really think this is luxurious for a Syrian. About surveillance, the regime was not great at the beginning. And we were at that time giving a very basic digital security for those activists who were working inside the regime-held areas. But sadly, after the Russian intervention in Syria, they really then began the very harsh and very new tools using surveillance, and it became much more difficult.
Because the Russians were helping them, do you think?
Definitely. They were giving them systems and new softwares, and it became much more harder on the activists, especially those working in the regime-held areas, to protect themselves, and even those who are working abroad, because they're also targets. We try to adapt with this with the digital security training, but we are really trying to follow on that, but they are using new equipment every day.
Errol, what about surveillance in Turkey?
Syrian in Turkey?
Surveillance.
Surveillance. You know, for journalists and civil society organization, it's became quite a common topic. A Reporter Without Border, with the collaboration with a Turkey website, have held some ateliers on journalist safety over the last 2-3 years. So yes, Turkish journalists are, it's a common topic for many Turkish journalists, but we pretty well know that Turkish government, on other hand, invests a lot on infrastructure able to detect all kind of on all kind of protection measures taken by civil society organization and journalists. Let's say that it is a constant, it is an ongoing protection engagement, but it is not. Sometimes it can play against you because you feel the need to save your, to protect your information sources. And sometimes it's good because you know that you are exposed to more and more to the security measures.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, I know that the Obama administration was pretty active in helping journalists with counter surveillance tools and training and that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about the range of programs?
Well, so this is something that my former bureau, DRL at the State Department, helped to fund, and it may well be that some of the programs that you benefited from were supported by the U.S. government, and we basically just do these trainings to help journalists and political activists in other countries figure out the best way to stay safe, to stay one step ahead. I always thought it was kind of funny and very American that that one part of the U.S. government, my part, was funding not just training, but the development of some of these technologies, like Tor, the very highly secure web browser that, shall we say, another part of the U.S. government was trying to break. And I'm very happy to say that my bureau, which had a budget for this sort of stuff of, maybe $10 million, was several steps ahead of the other part of the U.S. government, which had a budget that was slightly higher.
Slightly higher. Okay. Thank you. Questions? Yes.
Hi, my name's Jolie Friedman. I'm the press officer at the Israeli Embassy, and my question's for Zaina. The civilian journalists you spoke of in Syria, are you confident that they'll be able to continue their work, or if you're fearful that the majority of them, vast majority of them, could be silenced? How do you see that affecting some of the uprising movements, resistance movements, things like that?
Do you want me to answer?
Yes.
Well, sadly, if I look back to 2011, most of those who were reporting by then are either killed, kidnapped, in prison. I have a very long list. I can't even remember those friends who I lost in the last 6 years. I feel they're very much left alone. I can mention very few organizations, including mine and RSF, who are caring about Syrian journalists inside Syria as much as they care about those foreign journalists who go to report in Syria. I'm sure you all know about. You can name 10 foreign journalists who get kidnapped in Syria, but you can name 2 of Syrians who are kidnapped inside Syria. So they're very much left alone. Mainly, maybe the language barrier is a great issue because they don't speak English. They can represent themselves. Very few support. Some very big media outlets, they're taking advantage of them. They work for free. They don't charge them. They don't give them fees. Health insurance is very difficult. So everything is pushing them to run away. And until now, some are still trying to survive because they feel that they have a mission to do, and they feel that if they don't report something, it wouldn't happen. Like Khan Sheikhoun latest massacre. If we don't have those boots on the ground and people showing the picture of the shaking bodies of the kids, we wouldn't really know what happened there, and we wouldn't believe it if we heard it from a mouth. So they are there, they are willing to stay there, but they need the help, they need the support, and they need to be noticed and heard.
What kind of help and support?
I think the trainings, not only the training to build their capacity, but also to help them after being trained to find a place to work at where they are recognized, where they are treated as a professional journalist, not as an activist who we take information from and we're not paying him back for that. Helping with insurance, I know it's pretty difficult, but finding this safe atmosphere that if they get injured or they're killed, their families are going to be safe. If they're kidnapped, there is someone to take care of them. Those safety measures would help a lot for them to survive and keep working as they are now.
So the insurance would allow them to leave the country and get help? How would that work?
Most of those who are working inside can somehow cross to the neighboring countries, and neighboring countries are the only place that we Syrians can go to easily. And there are plenty of opportunities that could be done there for them.
And to what extent do you find this network of correspondents, right on the border or outside, being able to reach inside and do the reporting, through websites and through texting and all that sort of thing? That must be a big alternative now for many.
It is, and I would completely not recommend for any, especially foreigner, to cross into Syria. I tweeted about that last year, and all the requests I got for foreign journalists to help to get inside, I was saying, no, I can't even secure my own safety. I can't really ask you to come in. But in neighboring countries, we have plenty of Syrians. In Turkey, we have almost 2 million Syrians. They all have connections inside. They all have families inside. It's pretty easy to reach those sources. But sadly, we also have a few foreign journalists who are settled in the neighboring countries and are willing to cover Syria. Most of them are covering it from London, from the US, which is pretty far.
Errol, have the Turkish journalists come up with ways to continue to do their work despite the novel ways to continue to do their work, either from the outside or in hiding or something else, despite the crackdown? Can you talk about that a minute?
Yes, I think over the last 2 decades, there is a specific situation that we are all witnessing, is many journalists from different political wing, working for very diverse media outlets, have chosen the way to go to live in exile. So we have a couple of examples of independent journalism based in Germany, mostly in Germany. And it's providing a new tool. I cannot say right now that it is well spread examples, but it's a breath for a journalism much more exposed to instant in Turkey, because today we are just trying to defend 20% of critical journalists in Turkey. Let's say that ideologically or by financial interest, 80% of Turkish mainstream media outlets are directly or indirectly ties to the government. So we have a couple of small newspapers, pro-Kurdish, leftist, secular one, just try to keep a critical voice toward Erdogan administration. And this outside example provide another area where journalists, and of course every day many colleagues call me and to say, apparently my career in Turkey is over. So how can I go outside, and what to do for exerting better my career? It's a dramatical situation. I never witnessed that over the last 2 decades.
And you're talking about websites that they create from abroad. And there are many Turkish journalists in exile here. The Turkish government still harasses them when they're here, and many of them have the problem of unemployment. So, creating a business model maybe for those who are trying to report outside is one possible solution or workaround.
I think that no, media outlets in Turkey are entirely functioning in a liberal model. So they are considered to be some companies. So they are obliged to provide their resources from their activities. Of course, pro-government dailies don't have such a problems. They are massively supported by companies. They have huge advertisement contribution. Even they are not selling huge, they don't have a huge circulation. They are not selling, rare are the one are selling more than 100,000 copy. Normally it's not enough to survive in Turkey. But when you get the support of pro-government companies and institutions, everything is perfect. But when I evoke pro-Kurdish, liberal or secular or leftist newspaper, mostly they have very limited circulations, no more than 50,000 copy a day. No. So they are financially in a very critical situation.
Tom, you probably faced this a lot and thought about it, the idea of now reporting from the outside what you can't report on the inside. Were there programs that were stood up or that you thought should be stood up to help those outlets or to help journalists who are still alive and willing to report but can't do it from their own countries?
Yes, we tried to do a little bit, but if you think about the size of that challenge, it's not going to be possible for the US government to be financially supporting independent media broadcasting into Russia or into China or into Turkey or other closed societies in a sustainable way.
Is that a role for NGOs then? Or?
Well, I actually had one creative idea.
Good.
Which can mean crazy idea, but what is the best way to support media? It's through advertising. That's the proper way to support it, through the market. And we found, we were looking at Russia actually in particular, where this is a huge problem. And some of my staff drew the unenviable task of having to watch Russian television because we wanted to look at particularly some of the talk shows featuring really virulently anti-American, even anti-Semitic hosts, who go off on these paranoid screeds. And so they were watching this stuff, and then they noticed that after each screed, they would cut to a commercial, and it would be Coca-Cola and General Motors, and all of these large American companies who did not know they were advertising on fascist television, basically. And because they're just doing big ad buys in Russia, and then the money is distributed by the local ad companies. And so the thought that I had was that that our Congress, in its wisdom, should not prohibit our companies from advertising on state media in these markets, but to say, if you are going to be advertising on state media in a closed society, particularly in a country where state media is used as to broadcast very virulently anti-American messages, you should be required to dedicate some small share of your advertising revenue for that country to independent media, which of course would be purchased at market rates. So if your independent media outlet is very small, it would be very cheap, right? But at the very least, it would create a more sustainable market-based fundraising model for that sort of media.
Or even letting them know that their ads are on these outlets might do something.
Well, yes, actually embarrassing them would be the first task. So if there are any journalists in this room, you might want to do that.
Exactly. Ben, what about in Canada? Have reporters come up with innovative ways to try to get around what they think might be surveillance by the Canadian government? I know that we instituted a lot of things in the last 10 years because of that.
I think the awareness among Canadian journalists, and I would say most Western journalists, about some of the best practices when you go, especially when you report in countries where there's even heavier surveillance. But I think in Canada, I mean, I report on national security and on cybersecurity specifically, and I take pretty good operational security myself, but I do know that the agency he was referring to can, if they want something, they're going to get it at some point. Yeah. All you can do is slow it down. If you have a Western intelligence agency after you, they're going to get the stuff that they want. Same goes for something like Russia, which was interesting that Russia's helping Syria. It's been a classic relationship.
Syrian regime.
Syrian regime. So I think that the really sad truth is that all you can do is slow the intelligence agencies down and law enforcement, and be aware of what they're capable of. Like, one thing that I find shocking is how people are unaware of something called an IMSI catcher, which is, it essentially fakes being a cell tower so that it can get your information on your cell phone, your coordinates, things like that. And these are Western companies that are creating them. So I think the thing to do is just to be aware of what's out there and the precautions you have to take.
And to not leave a digital trail by using non-digital means, communicating with people directly. Yep. Any more? Yes, question from the audience. Okay, there's two here. We have microphones somewhere.
Hi, my name is Shireen. I'm from a journalist from Middle East Broadcasting Network. My question is for anyone. I actually have two questions. The world is getting darker. So how do you see the future of this career? And the second question is that what's happening to journalists, is it an index or a reflection to what is going on in the society overall? Thank you.
Who would like to take that?
I will just comment on the second part of that question. I believe the freedom of expression is definitely an index of the freedom that's in that country. In our case, we were a North Korean sample before the uprising. Then we finally had some space, and then it was cracked down. It's definitely showing what the freedom of that country goes, and I think it shows where it's heading. If we somehow in the conflict, and finally Syria started getting up in the index that RSF are doing, I'm sure that will indicate that Syria is getting more freedom for everyone, and the human rights level are going to be getting better.
Tom, do you want to weigh in?
Well, I mean, I'm not a journalist, so I'm not sure if I can talk about the career. I do think that the repression is often a reaction to the success of those being repressed. And so there's a reason why journalists are under pressure around the world. It's because journalists have successfully placed governments and politicians under pressure. If you look, for example, at some of the groundbreaking reporting that has been done on corruption in many parts of the world, which in turn is the product of a lot of progress that we have made, including good governments have made, in getting information about the finances of powerful people out into the open source world. So that information is out there. Journalists do a courageous and amazing job in bringing it out. And those who they expose don't like it. And guess what? They're mean, tough, nasty people, and they fight back. And so what we're seeing is the product of that clash. And we mourn every single time a journalist is attacked or killed because they've done their job. But if you look at the successes as well, including just in the last 2 or 3 months in the United States, an extraordinary flowering of investigative journalism that has absolutely tied the hands of President Trump in a number of areas and changed his policies and his personnel. If you look at the Michael Flynn case, I was a little bit more pessimistic 3 months ago about whether the traditional methods of journalism can work in the face of, in the kind of political climate that we have. I'm more optimistic today that they can.
And just to stay on that optimistic note for a minute, you mentioned corruption and strengthening laws against corruption and transparency. If you want to look at a great illustration of what the power of journalism can do, go to OCCRP. I'm not going to spell it out right now, but they are a foundation-funded organization that has done amazing work on corruption in Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and elsewhere. So we're trying to also come with the positive things here, and I think, again, journalists are so resilient, they figure out ways around obstacles. And we had one more question, a couple more questions. Yes, over here.
My name is Corey Flintoff. I'm a former correspondent for NPR in Russia. And my question is to Zaina and Errol. To what extent do you think these autocratic regimes are sharing techniques for surveillance and hacking against journalists? And specifically, do you have a sense of whether Russia is sharing its techniques and doing training for the regimes in Syria and Turkey?
Okay, about the Syria part, it's confirmed that well, first they have boot on the ground, they own the sky, so definitely they're running the electronic system of the regime, and they're helping it a lot in the digital phase. Even before starting the invasion on Syria, we knew then that they are providing this experience in the technology, and they created this electronic army that was attacking mainly Syrian journalists and Syrian activists who were working inside Syria and outside. So with the Russian, they're definitely very much involved in the Syrian context, and they are helping the regime a lot to attack all of us, like physically and digitally and mentally in all ways.
I'm not expert in this field, but I think that, Russia is a quite new partner for Turkish government. I think that we are not in a step where excellent exchange, even in this field, are exercised at a high level. But I believe strongly that Turkish police department is perfectly equipped. They have special section dealing with surveillance. And Turkey is the country which submits the most demand to Twitter, Facebook, or other internet service providers for getting many accounts censored. You know, I would like to add something to the previous question. Turkey, if you have 10 businessmen investing in media, it does not mean that you have a pluralism of the media. They can perfectly agree on providing standards coverage and on everything. And I think Turkey is a wonderful laboratory. Media literacy is very important. You know, when foreign media cover, for example, Panama Papers, and when you have at least 650 names, Turkish businessmen in this list, I think Turkish people should be able to access to these corruption issues, not dealing as if it is happened in another galaxy, you know. But unfortunately, it was just limited to an international issue in Turkish media. Just one single newspaper covered this issue, but get court cases against them. So I think that people are more and more exposed to make a good choice in terms of following a reliable media, reliable content also.
Thank you. Apparently we're out of time. So wanted to thank our panelists and Delphine, Reporters Without Borders. And we hope that next year Austin Tice will be with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.